The RTR here is a pretty powerful bike, especially if you upgrade it to something like the 6+7 kit, or like me, you made your own version of that for next to nothing. But all that power goes through this dinky little 35 chain. Well, not this chain actually. This is technically a heavy-duty 35 chain, so supposedly it can handle more. But what does that actually do? I need more than that. Don't worry though, there's the thick chain with 2 Cs. But this bike has a lot of power, so I need something more, something really thick with like 8 Cs. It's finally time to upgrade to the big boy chain. The RTR here is getting what comes standard on the Alpha Pro and even some of the other 48-volt bikes, a 420 chain. Now, I've seen some people do this in the last few months, so I know it's actually possible, and I believe with actual Electro & Co components. However, I just rechecked the website, and for the life of me, I cannot find those specific front sprockets that they sold. If I remember correctly, this was for a different motor, but it had the same spline pattern, but I checked the website, and all I could find were 420 front sprockets for QS motors, and maybe that is the case that they have the same spline pattern, but if they did, you'd think that Electro & Co would put that in the description. However, Electro & Co does now sell, finally, the revolver motor, which has the 420 conversion. Now, as of recording this, I don't see the ability on the website to order just the front sprocket, or whether or not it's actually compatible with the stock motor on these bikes, but I would assume that that's the case. And if that's the case, I would really hope that Electro & Co offers the front sprocket or both sprockets and a chain as its own separate kit, so that way everyone has the opportunity to convert their bike, no matter what's in it, to a 420. But when I swapped the RTR motor for the Sotion GTS 11C, I knew that I wanted to take advantage of the fact that I could easily swap to a 420 chain with the aid of their front sprockets, like this. There's a few sizes available. There's 9, 10, and 11 teeth, and for gearing purposes, more on that later, I opted for their smallest possible 9-tooth sprocket. We'll get right into it with removing the 35 chain and dropping the motor. Now with the motor removed from the bike, it's so much easier to work on things, and as you can see, it's pretty simple because all it is for the front sprocket at least is 1 bolt. But hold on, it's not that simple necessarily. If you look a little bit closer at the bolt and the shaft that it's threaded onto, you might notice that this is reverse threaded, so that means it's not righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, it's righty-loosey, lefty-tighty. At least that's the case with this Sotion motor, and I know for the stock RTR motor. The other thing is that this bolt is on there pretty tight, and obviously it's on something that rotates freely, so you can't just stick a socket on that and try to loosen it. It's just going to spin around. Thankfully, there's a few ways that you can actually hold this thing down so that you can apply enough torque and actually loosen the bolt. The first one is pretty simple, and you will definitely have this laying around because you just took it off. It's the old 35 chain. You can loop a portion of this onto the front sprocket, and that will hold on to the individual teeth, and then it gives you a handle right here so that you can apply pressure against it as you loosen. The other thing that I like to use, which is a tool that I have laying around, maybe you do too, is this big honker, which is a clutch tool. So if you have an ice bike, you might have one of these laying around, which has a couple of prongs, and it's got a locking clamp, so that way you can put it on both sides of the sprocket and hold it in place there, which is what I'm going to do. Now we move on to the next hurdle of this, now that the bolt's off, which may or may not be the case, but I think if you've ridden your bike with any number of miles, and if this was properly torqued, you're going to come across this scenario where you can't just pull off the sprocket. It's kind of pressure fit to the shaft. It's not really going anywhere. You need a little bit more extra help with that, so I have this. If you don't work on cars very often, you might not have this tool laying around, but it's easy to get and pretty cheap at Harbor Freight. This is a tie rod puller. It might be a little too big in your case, but for me, it just slides in enough under the sprocket so that I can be able to tighten this thing and it'll pop right off. Now, installation instructions are exactly what you just saw, just reverse it. We're gonna put the new sprocket on there and tighten this down. Remember, lefty-tighty, and we can go ahead and throw the motor back into the bike. Now the hard part's done. We got the front fully put together and intact. Now it's just the rear here. We gotta take off the tire so that we can swap the rear sprocket. And from here, we're gonna get to straight swapping. We're gonna take the old one and put it to the side because we're actually gonna see it later in the video, but we're gonna put the new one on, which is an inspiration from the Alpha Pro because it's the exact same rear sprocket. Found it on Amazon, link in the description. Now time to talk chain to go between the new sprockets. And with 420 chains, you really can't go wrong, but as seems to be the tradition with this RTR project, we're gonna actually be using some spares from another bike. This chain was pulled from my Honda Grom, and funny enough, it's because because it was converted to an even bigger chain than the 420. It was converted to a 428 kit. So now this stock size chain is going to be the conversion kit and upgrade kit for the RTR. Although this isn't necessarily a case of sloppy seconds, because this 420 chain is actually a pretty good one. This is an X-ring chain. So what that means is that between each of these rollers here are a series of O-rings, or X-rings in this case. If you cut them in half, they're the shape of an X. And what they do is basically decrease the amount of wear on this so it lasts longer, and hopefully in this case for the RTR at the very least, make it quieter, because that's always welcome when you have an RTR. Now as far as sizing and the number of links on this, I don't think it matters, because honestly we're gonna have to cut this down for the RTR because the RTR's chain is so short to begin with. The motor's inside the swing arm, so it doesn't have that far to go. But in either case, I will link what I have in the description below. Uh-oh. Well, it looks like I need to immediately eat my words, because as you can see here, clearly we are exactly 4 links short on this chain. So again, I don't know what the number of links of this chain is specifically, but I will count it and add 4, put that on the screen, and that is what I will have in the description below. But that's not the only issue. I wish it was. If you actually rotate this, you can hear there's a lot of sound, a lot of chain rattle. I think that's for a number of reasons. The first issue, I think, is just the fact that the 420 chain is pretty thick compared to the 35. And I think this is a specific issue for me in my case, because this has a Sotion motor in it. If you saw that motor swap video, you would see that the shaft of the Sotion motor is much smaller than that of the RTR one. So it sits a lot closer to the motor case. And because of that, I think it's slightly rubbing on the mounts. Then there's also, funny enough, the issue with chain alignment. I'm going to try to show you this in the form of the focus. So looking at the chain here on the sprocket, and if you focus all the way down to the front where the motor is, you can see that it's just ever so slightly off. So the sprocket in the rear here is inset a little bit more than the front sprocket up here. Well, so much for filming everything in one day. It looks like I need to make some orders, and I guess I'll see you again once everything has been ordered and fixed. And we'll see if YouTube puts an ad right here, because it seems like a perfect break to do so, right YouTube? Welcome back. It's been a few days, as you could probably tell, but we're back in business. First thing was that super short chain. I originally thought it was a takeoff part from my Honda Grom, which if it was, it would require cutting down because it's a lot longer than what I need here, but it turns out that that was actually a takeoff part from my CT70 build. Remember those videos? Neither do I. But that bike most decidedly had a smaller chain, so I ordered a 90 chain and this one fit perfectly. I also ordered a chain that is not an X-ring. I decided to ditch that idea and went with a non-sealed chain because this one is so much thinner than an X-ring or an O-ring chain, which definitely comes into play for the other issues that I came across. The next fix, which was pretty easy, was just adding some washers to the back of this to kick it out a little bit and align the chain. It's not terribly recommended to do this, but in my instance, I think I needed to because I might have taken just a little bit too much off of the engine bracket when I was adapting this for the Sotion motor. Later down the line, I might order another engine bracket so I can recut it appropriately. That way I don't have to adjust the rear, but washers work for now. So after all that, aligning the sprockets and adding the chain, I found that, once again, another problem, it rubbed really badly. This is a me problem though, not a you problem, because I'm using a Sotion motor. The Sotion sprocket sits a lot closer to the motor case and the motor mounts themselves are pretty thick. So I ground out some of the channels on the mount for the chain to clear, and since it looked so bad, covered it in gold paint because why not? Make it look fancy. But now finally, after all that, it works.
Now another thing about this while we're trying it out is gearing. So I mentioned earlier that I got the smallest front sprocket available with a 420 chain, which is 9T. I did that because I wanted to keep as close as a ratio to the original RTR, which also had a 9-tooth front sprocket. However, the rear sprocket on the Electro & Co was 73 teeth, and this new one is, well, less. 60 teeth. And changing from a 73 tooth down to a 60 tooth in the rear actually has a pretty significant impact on torque and speed. It actually reduces the torque by about 20%. That seems like a lot, but at the same time, this is pretty torquey to begin with, and I don't really feel a difference. I definitely hear a difference, but I think maybe that's just because this is a bigger chain, so more rotating mass. I'm also not so worried about this gear ratio because previously when I just swapped out the Sotion in the front, that actually had a different sized front sprocket. It wasn't a 9-tooth like the Electro & Co kit, it was actually an 11-tooth. And comparing that gear ratio to now this one with the 420, it's almost exactly the same, 1173 to 960. So overall, it's a reasonable enough gear ratio that I still have some good torque, and as a bonus, it should add some top speed to this thing too. I need to adjust the speedo though. I didn't think about that. All that to say, I think it worked out pretty well.
Well, now that we got all that taken care of with the RTR here, what to do with the old sprocket? Well, in a previous video, I mentioned that you can get 35 chain sprockets all the way up to 77 teeth in the rear. And even though this is only a 73 tooth, that's still pretty freaking big, especially if, well, oh, I don't know, you put it on a bike that has a 55 tooth currently. So you know what we gotta do, right? Okay, let's see what this does. Oh my God, that's insane. This thing is almost the same diameter as the rim. Oh, this is gonna be fun.
Damn, I guess we'll have to wait to see that on another date. Next week? Next month? Better not be. That'd be weak. At least the RTR got its big boy chain.